Welcome back to the deep dive. Every now and then, a crime story emerges that is so audacious, so thoroughly unbelievable, it sort of stops being just the financial headline and, well, it starts becoming almost a modern myth.
Mm.
Today, we are deep diving into one of those stories, a narrative that absolutely captivated and, frankly, scandalized Australia and became pretty famous worldwide. The saga of Melissa Caddick.
It really is the ultimate cautionary tale, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially from that sort of Sydney high roller scene.
Yeah.
This case, it has every single dramatic element you could possibly ask for.
It really does.
You've got a seemingly perfect life built on this immense, totally fabricated wealth. Then there's the betrayal of dozens of clients, and crucially, many of them were family and friends.
Yeah, the closest people.
Exactly. And then the Vanishing Act. Following a police raid, no less, which culminates in, well, one of the most bizarre forensic discoveries in recent memory.
It's just incredible. For nearly a decade, Melissa Caddick played this role, the infallible, successful financial guru living in absolute splendor in Sydney's eastern suburbs. But underneath all that diamond-studded facade
It was a massive $30 million Ponzi scheme, running completely unregulated, completely off the books.
and the whole illusion just collapsed instantly when the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, that's ASIC, and the Australian Federal Police, the AFP, came knocking on the door of her Dover Heights mansion. That was November 2020.
And here's the thing, the kernel of the mystery that keeps this story going, she disappeared the very next morning.
Just vanished.
No note, no luggage, just gone. The official ending, if you can call it that, is the discovery of a single decomposed human foot inside a running shoe.
Washed up on a remote beach, 500 kilometers away, months later?
Months later. And DNA confirmed it was hers.
So our mission today is to go far beyond those headlines. We really need to dissect the anatomy of this facade. We're trying to understand not just the timeline of Melissa Louise Caddick, born Melissa Grimley in 1971, but the recurring patterns of strategic deception she used.
Right from the very beginning.
From her very first job, right up until she apparently disappeared into the Pacific Ocean.
We've pulled together a pretty comprehensive stack of material. It details her life, the specific mechanics of her fraud, the legal battles fought by her victims and her family over the assets.
And those confusing, often contradictory coronial findings that came out in 2023.
Exactly.
So the initial setup for you, the listener, is this. We're analyzing an unlicensed financial advisor who orchestrated a massive Ponzi scheme, vanished in November 2020, and was ultimately declared legally deceased in 2023.
But the pivotal and honestly frustrating point is that the cause and the circumstances of that death remain officially undetermined.
Right. So we're left with all the evidence of the crime, this huge financial mess, but only half the story of the criminal herself. It's maddening.
And if we really want to get our heads around the monumental scale of that $30 million fraud, we absolutely have to start where the deception itself was first manufactured, which is her professional credentials, or a lack thereof.
Okay, let's unpack this journey then. We're starting with Section 1, Building the Facade, Early Life, and Career Deceptions. What's particularly chilling here, I think, is realizing that the entire professional image she built was founded on a lie that started when she was, barely out of college.
Precisely. Melissa Louise Grimley, born 1971, grew up in Logarno, Sydney. She attended Patrick's College, where she studied secretarial and business administration, which is, a perfectly reasonable, practical starting point for a career in finance admin.
Sure. Normal enough.
But it was far too humble for the image she clearly intended to project, even back then.
And what she intended to project required, academic pedigree, didn't it? Something more substantial.
It required entirely fabricated pedigree. Our source material confirms quite clearly that her professional resume included fictitious qualifications. She claimed to have secured either a graduate diploma in finance or even a master's of business in finance from the University of Technology, Sydney, UTS.
Wow. Okay. And in the competitive world of Sydney finance, having those letters after your name, that makes a huge difference, right? It grants immediate credibility, opens doors.
Absolutely. A master's degree suggests expertise, rigor, a high level of analytical skill. It's basically shorthand for competence that investors, they rely on that.
So people wouldn't question it too much.
Probably not initially, no. But when investigators later checked with UTS, their response was definitive and pretty damning. They confirmed they had no record of completion of a graduate diploma in finance or master's of business in finance, or indeed any qualification, under the name of Melissa Caddick or Melissa Grimley.
None at all. So the very foundation Its supposed financial genius that allowed her to handle tens of millions of dollars later on was completely manufactured. She didn't just exaggerate her role or experience, she manufactured the permission, the qualification to even hold that kind of role.
It really reveals a core psychological trait, doesn't it? It suggests she didn't believe she could earn the expertise or maybe wasn't patient enough, so she simply invented it. And this pattern of boundary crossing, it escalated very quickly. We see the first documented instance of actual theft in 1998, very early in her career.
Right, she'd moved from NRMA's investment division to a boutique investment bank, working as an office administrator. So how did she go from faking a degree on paper to actually, stealing money?
It was a remarkably short window. The sources confirm that just 6 months into that job, she was caught having stolen less than $82,000 from the firm.
Okay, less than $2,000.
The mechanics were simple, but quite indicative of her future methods. She forged her boss's signature on several checks to misappropriate the funds.
It's a petty crime, relatively speaking, especially compared to the $30 million figure we end up with. But the technique forgery, it's the same, isn't it? And the outcome of this incident, that's what seems to provide the disastrous precedent.
It is absolutely the most crucial detail of this early history. The boutique bank, probably worried about bad publicity or maybe just the hassle and expense of prosecution, made a pivotal decision. They opted not to pursue criminal charges.
Seriously?
Seriously. They gave her a choice: leave immediately, and they wouldn't involve the police. And of course, she chose to leave.
That's horrifying, actually. She wasn't punished. She wasn't even properly flagged in the system. She literally walked away from committing fraud, learned she could basically manipulate her way out of legal consequences, and got a clean slate to immediately move on to her next opportunity. It feels like it gave her a license to escalate.
It certainly seems to have instilled a dangerous sense of impunity, a confidence in her ability to control the narrative and just skirt the law. And she used that freedom almost instantly. She landed a job as a financial advisor for Wise Financial Services,
Which was, I think, a subsidiary of ING. A big name.
Exactly. That ING association provided a massive boost of third-party credibility. People trust big names like that.
Of course.
She wasn't just working at some small, unknown independent office anymore. She was associated with a globally recognized financial powerhouse, and she quickly established herself there too. She borrowed $750,000 to purchase a 25% stake in the Wise financial business.
Wow, okay. So she's putting money in, showing commitment.
Exactly. It cemented her as a serious player. And by 2003, she was riding high enough on this wave of, fabricated and accelerated success to actually be featured on the cover of the trade magazine Independent Financial Advisor.
That kind of visibility is marketing gold for an advisor, isn't it? It builds trust, makes you look like an expert. But her partnership with Wise eventually dissolved.
Yeah.
And the reason why seems to point directly to her inherent disregard for rules, for regulatory boundaries.
It really does. The source material reveals the key conflict. Wise refused to allow her to recommend direct property investment and direct shares to her clients. It wasn't an arbitrary decision on their part. It was due to strict internal regulatory compliance rules. Recommending property and direct shares carries different, often higher regulatory burdens and risks compared to standard managed funds. Wise was basically protecting its compliance structure, protecting itself.
So she faced a choice. Operate within the established rules set by this big regulated company, or go her own way to maximize her own potential profits and, I guess, operational freedom.
And she chose freedom. She left.
Okay.
And the exit itself was financially quite modest, actually, contrary to the stories she later told. She only received the return of her initial $750,000 investment. And most importantly, for her future career trajectory, she signed a 5-year non-compete agreement.
5 years. That's a long time in finance.
It is. It effectively put her on the sidelines of the regulated financial advisory world for half a decade.
So she was professionally restricted, couldn't legally advise in the way she wanted, but now she had this expensive lifestyle to maintain and this high-flying image to justify. This is where the really fantastical stories start to emerge, right? To cover that professional gap.
Exactly right. To explain how she could suddenly appear independently wealthy, despite these professional restrictions, she concocted varying stories of a massive windfall, just completely made them up.
Like what? What kind of stories?
Well, the most colorful versions circulating among her friends and potential clients included, believe it or not, an $86 million severance package from Wise.
$86 million. From a $750K investment. That's insane.
Utterly implausible. Or another version was a similarly large payout she claimed she received from settling a sexual harassment claim against Wise.
Okay, so a lie that big, it serves two purposes, doesn't it? First, it explains her sudden, unexplained wealth. And second, it probably preemptively shuts down any awkward questions later about where future massive investment returns might be coming from. I mean, who questions the investment strategy of a woman who supposedly just pocketed $86 million?
Precisely. It creates this expectation of extreme, almost unbelievable success. It makes her seem like a financial Midas. And that narrative became the necessary financial smokescreen for the years she spent operating illegally, completely without the required AFS license.
Which brings us, I suppose, to the next section, how she leveraged her personal relationships. Because that fabrication of trust wasn't just limited to her professional life, was it? She used the exact same playbook in her marriage.
Yeah, it seems the manipulative patterns established professionally were just transposed directly onto her personal life. There wasn't much separation.
Okay, let's move into section 2. Personal life and relationship as collateral. This really shows her utilizing her personal sphere, not just for, emotional connection, but as a source of credibility and ultimately as a strategic position.
She married Tony Caddick, who was a builder's laborer back in 2000. Their son was born 6 years later, in 2006. What's interesting is her immediate influence on Tony's own professional life.
What did she do?
She immediately encouraged him to sort of elevate his professional status. He had studied political science, apparently, and she pushed him really hard to complete his law degree.
Okay.
And he did. He was admitted as a solicitor in 2006. Now, you could see this as just supportive spousal behavior, but given everything else...
It also fits the pattern, right? Ensuring her partner contributed to the sophisticated, high-achieving image she clearly demanded for her family unit. It adds to the facade.
It absolutely does. They then relocated to Essex in England in 2010, so she moved away from her established network back in Australia.
Why Essex? Any idea?
The sources don't elaborate much on the why, but they do note that she quickly became bored not working over there. She obviously had the drive, the ambition, but she lacked the necessary legal environment or, crucially, the license to operate as she wanted in the UK.
And this boredom may be combined with her innate tendency towards deception. That led to the next betrayal, didn't it?
It did. That's the infamous fabricated trip to Switzerland. She told Tony she needed to travel there for a conference, supposedly to brush up on her financial skills.
Right, the classic pretext for an escape, or in this case, an affair.
It was pure deception from start to finish. The truth, which was confirmed later in the source material, was that she actually traveled to Paris.
Paris?
Yes, to rendezvous with Anthony Coletti, who was her hairdresser back in Sydney. This trip marked the beginning of their extramarital affair.
The sheer audacity of paying for her Sydney hairdresser's international flight to meet her secretly in Paris, while her husband, Tony, believed she was off bettering their financial future in Switzerland. It's quite something.
And the evidence eventually became undeniable. Tony apparently discovered the truth after a mutual friend happened to photograph Caddick and Coletti together in Paris.
Oh, wow. Bad luck for her.
Indeed. It confirmed not only the affair, but also that Caddick had paid for Coletti's international travel.
So the confrontation inevitably came. And her response, just like we saw with that $2,000 theft years earlier, was just ruthlessly efficient and totally preemptive. No remorse, just action.
It was a completely strategic cleanup operation, designed to leave Tony with basically nothing and ensure she maintained control of their son and, importantly, the narrative around the split. She cleaned out their Essex home, took everything.
Everything.
Apparently so, emptied their joint bank accounts, and immediately flew back to Sydney with their son in January 2012. Just bang, gone.
She essentially weaponized the separation, didn't she?
Yeah.
Financially and emotionally, leaving him stranded over there.
And then, to protect her reputation back in Australia and perhaps justify the very quick subsequent marriage to Coletti, she launched an immediate campaign of false claims against Tony.
What did she say?
She falsely claimed to friends and family that Tony had been an abusive and controlling spouse. This tactic allowed her to cast herself as the victim, seeking refuge, and conveniently cast Coletti as her rescuer, her protector.
It's the exact same manipulative pattern we saw earlier, isn't it? When threatened, deploy a lie so potent-like, fabricating qualifications or claiming sexual harassment or now alleging abuse, that it just deflects all scrutiny from her own actions. She uses these highly charged social narratives almost like a shield.
It really seems to be the consistent psychological thread running through this entire story. Once the divorce from Tony was finalized in 2013, She married Coletti later that same year.
Right.
And with her personal life now restabilized, or at least rearranged, and her professional non-compete agreement nearing its end, she was finally ready to launch the true financial engine of her criminal career. Which brings us neatly to Section 3, the engine of deception, the Ponzi scheme itself.
Okay, this is the critical juncture, isn't it? This is where the fabricated degrees, the carefully crafted reputation, the personal betrayals, it all comes together to enable her to siphon off that staggering $30 million from unsuspecting investors, and mostly from those closest to her.
The operational timeline is just vast. The scheme ran for approximately 8 years, between October 2012 and November 2020, right up until the raid.
8 years. 8 years running an entirely fraudulent operation day in, day out. The scale is almost hard to comprehend. We're talking about misappropriating approximately $30 million from clients.
Yeah, around that figure.
And the most painful aspect, as you mentioned earlier, is that the client base was almost entirely family and friends, people who trusted her implicitly because of that carefully curated image, that shared history.
That intimate relationship is really the defining characteristic of her particular Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme, at its simplest, is an investment fraud where the operator pays supposed returns to earlier investors, not from genuine profits, obviously.
But from the new cash coming in.
Exactly, from the new capital paid in by subsequent investors. It creates this illusion of a successful, high-performing investment strategy when, in reality, no real growth is occurring at all. It's just a house of cards that inevitably collapses when the new money stops flowing in.
And Melissa Caddick must have needed to rapidly cycle that money, constantly bringing in new funds, just to maintain the illusion of those high returns for her early investors, while also funding her incredibly lavish lifestyle.
Absolutely. And to manage this massive flow of incoming and outgoing money, and importantly, to make it nearly untraceable, she employed complexity as a kind of cloak. She deposited funds into a huge network of accounts. The source material confirms she used at least 37 different bank accounts.
37? Wow.
Yeah. This layering and splitting of funds across so many accounts was almost certainly designed specifically to obscure the trail from auditors, regulators, or even just nosy investors.
So if an auditor, which of course she didn't have because she wasn't licensed, or maybe an investor requested to see some bank activity, they would just hit this wall of complexity and probably just trust her word because the returns on paper looked so incredible.
That seems to be the strategy. But the real masterpiece of the deception wasn't just managing the cash flow. It was maintaining the illusion of performance day after day, month after month. She couldn't just tell people they were getting rich. She had to show them official-looking reports that proved it.
And this is where her original sin, if you like, the forgery, came back into play, but on a much grander, much more sophisticated scale than just forging a signature on a check.
Absolutely. She fabricated ComSec portfolio statements. Now, ComSec is a highly recognizable and reputable brokerage arm of the Commonwealth Bank in Australia. Seeing their logo immediately conferred legitimacy.
People would trust that instantly.
Instantly. But she didn't stop there. She then created fake account numbers on these forged statements to show investors these purported returns, these massive gains.
That detail about the fake account numbers feels critical. It's not enough just to fake the letterhead or the logo. You have to ensure the investor can't just pick up the phone, call ComSec, and try to verify their portfolio using that account number.
Precisely. If an investor got suspicious and tried to call ComSec to verify the account number on their statement, ComSec would simply say, sorry, that number doesn't exist in our system, or perhaps that number belongs to someone else entirely. This ensured the investor remained completely dependent solely on Melissa Caddick for information. It reinforced her position as the indispensable financial wizard who held all the keys. She created this perfectly closed loop of deceit.
Wow. And the money she was funneling through those 37 bank accounts wasn't actually going into shares or investments. It was going straight into funding her personal brand, the trappings of wealth, which ironically served as her greatest advertisement. The more successful she looked, the more people wanted in.
Her expenditure was absolutely astronomical because, in a twisted way, the spending was the business model. She needed that visible success, the opulence, the luxury to attract new investors. People saw the lifestyle and believed it was proof that her investment strategy must be incredibly successful.
So tell us, what was she actually spending the proceeds on, beyond the 2 massive houses in Sydney's affluent eastern suburbs? What else?
Oh, the sources reveal just a relentless stream of personal consumption. Luxury European cars, Porsches, Mercedes, Audis, original artwork, high-end jewelry, I think Cartier, Bulgari, and a massive, truly extensive collection of designer clothing.
Like what brands?
Dior, Chanel, Gucci, Oscar de la Renta, you name it. She apparently spent millions, literally millions, simply maintaining this aesthetic of unbelievable wealth.
I remember reading an estimate that the money she blew at just one single jewelry store, Canturi, was over $1 million. It's not just buying nice clothes, it's treating these vast sums of stolen money as completely ephemeral props in her ongoing performance of success.
Counsel for ASIC, Fareed Asaf SC, really nailed the summary of the strategy during the later legal proceedings. When describing her acquisition of all the trappings of wealth, he stated quite bluntly that her financial services business was merely an elaborate front for Mrs. Caddick's Ponzi scheme,
Yeah.
and that her entire perceived success was all a facade. The cold, hard legal reality was that she was simply stealing money to buy status, to buy credibility.
And the underpinning legal violation, the one that meant all her clients had absolutely zero protection when it all went wrong, was confirmed later in court, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The court confirmed that Caddick, operating through her company Melissa Caddick Ltd., operated without the legally required Australian Financial Services AFS license for the entire 8-year period of the scheme, from 2012 right through to 2020.
And that's huge, isn't it? Why is that AFS license so important?
It's critical. The AFS license system exists to ensure that financial advisors meet minimum competency standards, that they adhere to strict compliance rules, and importantly, that they are legally obligated to act in the best interest of their client. That's the fiduciary duty. By operating completely without it, she was totally unregulated, completely unaccountable, and offered her clients absolutely no legal recourse or compensation scheme access until the whole thing inevitably imploded.
So, okay, we have 8 years of escalating fraud, $30 million stolen, mostly from friends and family, and this perfect shiny facade built on lies and luxury goods. And then suddenly, violently, the music stops. Let's move to Section 4, the Vanishing Act and the Discovery. This is where the narrative shifts dramatically from financial crime to something more like a pure thriller.
Yeah, the investigative wheels of ASIC and the AFP, they might turn slowly sometimes, but they do turn surely. They had obviously gathered enough evidence, enough complaints probably, to finally move in.
The trigger was that raid. ASIC agents and the Australian Federal Police raiding her Dover Heights home on November 11th, 2020. Remembrance Day, ironically.
It was a massive operation, apparently lasted for hours. Investigators were all over the property, seizing huge amounts of financial records, computers, hard drives, luxury goods, basically any evidence of the fraud they could find. And Caddick was present for the entire duration.
Wow. She must have been confronting the physical collapse of her entire world, her facade, right there in her own luxurious home, watching them take it all away.
You'd have to imagine so. And then she disappeared the very next morning, November 12th, 2020.
Gone before dawn. What were the last known details?
The last confirmed sound, according to her son, was him hearing a door shut around 5:30 a.m. He just presumed she was going out for her routine daily exercise, her run along the cliffs. Crucially, she left behind all her possessions, keys, wallet, passport.
And most tellingly for modern life, she left her mobile phone.
Exactly. In today's digital age, leaving your phone behind is almost like leaving your entire identity behind, isn't it? It suggests either a complete total break from her former life, a desire to be untraceable.
Or possibly that she intended to avoid all tracking methods because she didn't plan on being found.
It certainly points strongly towards either a desperate, perhaps unplanned escape, or, tragically, self-harm, as it completely eliminated her ability to communicate or be traced digitally. Despite really intensive efforts, the police found the immediate investigation into her movements after leaving the house. Well, it was inconclusive.
They reviewed huge amounts of CCTV footage from the area, didn't they? But Dover Heights is a big, quite wealthy cliffside suburb. Lots of private properties, maybe not total coverage.
Exactly. The local CCTV coverage was described as patchy. They simply could not definitively establish her exact route or her movements after that 5:30 a.m. door shut was heard. So, for 3 months, she was officially categorized as a missing person, and the theories went wild.
Oh yeah, everything from her hiding out in some remote country mansion funded by hidden cash to having already fled the country using a fake passport.
Total speculation. And then, months later, came that discovery. hundreds of kilometers away, that brought the whole mystery crashing back to a very grim reality.
The foot.
The foot. On February 21st, 2021, a deeply macabre find was made down on Bournda Beach. That's near Tathra, on the far south coast of New South Wales. Some beachcombers found what they thought was just discarded debris, maybe a bag of garbage washed ashore, but inside was a single decomposed human foot still inside an Asics running shoe.
And that location, Bournda Beach, as we said, it's approximately 500 kilometers or about 310 miles south of Dover Heights, where she disappeared from.
Yep.
On the surface, it seems almost impossible that those two locations could be connected by anything other than pure coincidence.
It certainly did seem that way initially, which is why the forensic evidence from the shoe itself was so pivotal right at the start. Investigators immediately focused on the shoe. It was quite a distinctive brand and style, an Asics Gel Nimbus 22, apparently. And crucially, it matched not only her shoe size, but also the exact description of footwear Caddick was actually seen wearing during the AFP raid just 3 months earlier. They had photos.
Wow. Okay, so that small piece of evidence, the shoe, served as a potential bridge across that huge 500-kilometer gap.
It did, and then the DNA confirmation absolutely solidified the link. Using samples obtained from her toothbrush back at the house and comparison samples from family members, the foot was definitively confirmed to belong to Melissa Caddick.
So, case closed, she's dead.
Well, it confirmed her remains had been found. But the real scientific achievement that convinced investigators that this wasn't just a random fluke, that it was plausible she entered the water near Dover Heights, was the marine modeling. The Police Marine Command undertook some pretty sophisticated tidal and drift pattern modeling.
Based on the timing.
Exactly, based on the timing of her disappearance around November 12th and the currents active at that time of year.
And what did that modeling show? Could a body really travel that far?
It demonstrated that if a body, or parts of a body, had entered the strong currents off the cliffs near Dover Heights around the time she vanished, the remains would likely be caught in coastal eddies and primarily the powerful East Australian current, which flows southwards.
Okay.
Their modeling showed it was highly probable that floating remains could reach the shore somewhere near Brahmagri, which is just 40 kilometers north of Tathra and Bournda Beach, where the foot was found.
That modeling is crucial then, isn't it? Because it provides the scientific validation for what initially seemed like a freak, almost impossible occurrence. It suggests the rest of her body likely disintegrated in the ocean or was lost to marine life. But the parts that were contained, like a foot protected inside a sturdy running shoe, could potentially travel that distance and eventually wash ashore.
It confirmed the physical possibility of a death occurring near her home address, leading directly to that discovery so far down the coast. So this moves us into Section 5. The enduring mystery, the hypotheses, and the eventual coronial findings. Because the foot provided the who, but it absolutely did not provide the how.
And the public speculation was just rampant, wasn't it? And even the experts themselves seem to offer competing theories of survival versus death, largely because that single grisly piece of evidence left so much room for doubt, for interpretation.
Yeah, even after the DNA confirmation came through, the well-known criminologist Dr. Zenthe Mallet publicly cautioned that, quote, "You can survive without your foot." She was emphasizing that while the discovery was incredibly significant, it didn't definitively confirm the specific cause or manner of death. It left that narrative door open, however small, that this could somehow still be a theatrical stunt, a faked death.
And her husband, Anthony Coletti, he certainly did his best to keep that door wide open, didn't he? He consistently maintained a narrative that ran completely counter to the police evidence in the most probable scenarios.
He absolutely did. In various interviews he gave in late 2021, he maintained two key points. First, that Caddick never stole any money, despite overwhelming ASIC evidence proving she did. And second, he insisted repeatedly that someone had killed his wife. He pushed a foul play narrative.
Which, given the circumstances, created immense public confusion and led to several widely circulated alternate theories, didn't it? We had the theory that Caddick had somehow managed to go into hiding, maybe even gruesomely cutting off her own foot as some kind of bizarre, macabre red herring to fake her own death and throw investigators off the scent for good.
Or, conversely, the suspicion arose that perhaps the husband, Coletti, was somehow complicit. Maybe he was actively assisting her in hiding somewhere, or at the very least fabricating the "she was murdered" story to deflect attention from her suicide or disappearance. These theories, really fueled by the lack of definitive evidence about her final moments, kept the police under immense pressure to find answers.
So, the police eventually had to formalize their position during the official coronial inquest into her death. What was their conclusion presented to the inquest in early 2023? What did they officially believe happened?
In February 2023, the police presented their findings to the inquest. They told the coroner that their extensive investigation concluded she had probably died after jumping from the cliffs at Rodney Reserve.
Which is right near her home.
Very near. It's a dramatic cliff face, only about 500 meters from her Dover Heights mansion. This conclusion aligned their official position with the marine drift modeling results. It was the most logical explanation fitting the available evidence.
That seems like the most likely scenario, given everything. But the final legal reality came a few months later, with the official coronial inquest findings released in May 2023. What was the definitive legal status delivered by the deputy state coroner then?
Well, the deputy state coroner, Elizabeth Ryan, officially declared Melissa Caddick deceased. Now, this is a really critical legal declaration. It allows all the civil proceedings, the recovery of money for the victims, to continue properly without the added complications and legal uncertainties of dealing with a missing person case.
Okay, so legally dead. But did the coroner determine how she died? Suicide, accident, foul play?
No. And this is the core of the enduring mystery. The coroner's final words highlighted the central, frustrating ambiguity of the entire saga.
What did she say?
Crucially, the coroner found she was unable to determine how Melissa Caddick died. She was confirmed dead, yes, but whether it was suicide or an accident like falling while running or even potentially foul play, the available forensic evidence, which was essentially just one decomposed foot, was simply insufficient to establish the manner of death to the required legal standard.
So the question of how, when, and where she actually died remained, in the coroner's own words.
Problematical, that was the word used. Still unresolved.
That lack of resolution, the inability to definitively close the narrative loop on how she died, that must be devastating. For the public, fascinated by the case, but more importantly, for the victims who were still seeking some form of final closure.
Absolutely. And this ambiguity also has potentially significant legal ramifications, particularly concerning things like life insurance claims or any outstanding financial instruments that might only pay out under certain specific circumstances of death, like accident versus suicide. It leaves things legally messy.
And beyond the ambiguity surrounding Caddick's own fate, the coroner made some very pointed observations regarding her husband, Anthony Coletti. Observations that really fueled the public suspicion that had been swirling around him since day one.
Yes, the coroner specifically noted two key areas of serious concern regarding his testimony and actions. First, there was a significant delay by Coletti in reporting Melissa Caddick's disappearance. He waited roughly 30 hours after she supposedly left the house before officially notifying the authorities she was missing.
30 hours? That seems like a very long time if your wife just vanishes without her phone or keys.
It does. And second, and perhaps even more damaging to his credibility, were what the coroner described as significant discrepancies in his accounts to police regarding the events of the 2 days surrounding her disappearance. His story kept changing.
What does that finding imply, legally speaking? That's pretty strong language for a coroner to use significant discrepancies.
It's highly suggestive, yes. It means the coroner formed a strong suspicion, though not a finding of fact, that Coletti was, and I quote the finding, aware of his wife's movements over the previous 2 days, but chose not to disclose them.
Wow.
Now, while this doesn't constitute a criminal charge against him or anything like that, it officially undermines his credibility as a reliable witness and leaves a substantial shadow of doubt hanging over his knowledge of her final hours. The coroner clearly suspected he knew more than he was letting on, perhaps protecting himself or perhaps protecting the circumstances of her disappearance from the authorities for some reason.
It really paints a picture of extreme isolation for Caddick in those final moments, doesn't it? She ran this entire elaborate scheme based on lies and deception, and when she vanished, the only person left to potentially give an account of her state of mind or movements was found by the coroner to be highly unreliable and possibly dishonest.
The ultimate fate of the chief fraudster remains an enigma, wrapped in mystery. But the financial wreckage she left behind in her wake was all too real, all too devastating for dozens of people. And that leads us directly to Section 6, the financial resolution, the aftermath. The focus here shifts entirely to the long, difficult process of recovery for the victims.
Right. Once Caddick was presumed dead, or at least once the foot was found and identified, the 38 criminal charges ASIC had laid against her were officially dropped. That happened in April 2021. But that didn't stop the civil proceedings, did it? The ones focused purely on asset recovery.
Not at all. The courts, specifically the federal court, immediately moved towards appointing receivers and liquidators to seize and sell off her assets, basically trying to restore some measure of financial justice to the victims she defrauded. In November 2021, the court formally confirmed the scope of the crime, that Caddick and her company Maliver had indeed fraudulently appropriated tens of millions of dollars and had operated illegally without an AFS license for that entire 8-year period.
So the grim, almost Herculean task then became trying to partially reimburse the 72 clients who had lodged claims, stating they were collectively owed more than $823 million.
And that number, $23 million, it's important to note, is just the capital they invested that they claimed they were owed back. It doesn't even factor in the fictitious sky-high returns she had falsely promised them on those fake ComSec statements over the years.
So the actual perceived loss was much higher for many.
Much higher in their minds, yes. To even begin to meet that $23 million debt, every single asset linked to her or bought with the stolen funds, from the multi-million-dollar houses right down to the designer shoes and handbags, had to be tracked down, seized, and sold off.
And this immediately kicked off some intense legal battles over those assets, didn't it? Particularly over the luxury waterfront home in Dover Heights, which she had purchased for $6.2 million using investor funds.
Absolutely. The liquidation process itself became a kind of courtroom drama, often involving the very people she had deceived the most. In February 2022, her husband, Anthony Coletti, formally objected to the sale of the Dover Heights house. He later filed a really comprehensive claim arguing for a substantial share of her assets.
What were the specifics of Coletti's claim? I mean, he was essentially asking for part ownership of properties and goods bought with stolen funds, wasn't he?
His claim was incredibly detailed and quite extensive. It really demonstrated the sheer volume of luxury goods she had acquired with the stolen money. He claimed ownership or a share of her Gucci wedding dress, $7 million worth of shares, which were likely phantom shares as the money wasn't invested but represented funds spent or claimed, $2 million worth of jewelry, the two main properties which he optimistically claimed were worth $20 million combined, and even proceeds from the sale of the luxury cars. He was essentially attempting to claim a spousal share of fraudulently obtained wealth.
That seems bold. And at the same time, her parents, who were living in an apartment she owned in Edgecliff, they were also fighting desperately to protect their residents, weren't they? They were victims too.
They were fighting for the Edgecliff apartment where they resided. Caddick's parents staked a formal claim on it in court, arguing that they had given Melissa $1.03 million towards its purchase back in 2016.
On what understanding?
On the understanding, they argued, that they would receive a significant percentage ownership, around 37%, and crucially, the right to live there for the rest of their lives, a life tenancy.
The heartbreaking irony here is almost unbelievable, isn't it? Her own parents were victims of her scheme too, and they were essentially forced to go to court and legally prove that their own daughter was a criminal, a fraudster, just to protect their own home from being sold off to pay back other victims.
They had to formalize that devastating reality in court documents. In April 2022, they filed a statement in the federal court openly admitting that, quote, Melissa dishonestly and fraudulently took their money for the apartment. That's just a brutal public admission of betrayal by your own child that you have to make.
Unimaginable. So despite these intense objections from Coletti and the heartbreaking claims from her parents, the asset liquidation process had to proceed for the benefit of all creditors. Coletti was eventually ordered to vacate the Dover Heights house in May 2022.
He was. And that property, the very symbol of the height of her fraudulent success, the stage for her performance, was sold in October 2022 for an astonishing $9.8 million.
Wow, $9.8 million. That's a significant profit on the original $6.2 million purchase price.
It was indeed a very healthy return, driven by Sydney's hot property market at the time. And that profit, of course, went straight back into the pool of funds available to be distributed among the defrauded investors.
And what about all the physical trappings of the facade? The designer clothing, the artwork, the jewelry. How much did they manage to realize at auction?
The luxury goods auction, held by Shapiro Auctioneers in December 2022, generated a total of $860,000. So between the sale of the house and the auction of her material possessions, the receivers managed to secure a substantial amount of money back. But, even adding those figures together, it still represents only a fraction of the more than $23 million owed to those 72 clients.
It's only partial justice then, financially speaking. But I guess it's a tangible, definitive step towards trying to right a huge financial wrong that was committed over 8 long years, all while operating completely without an AFS license.
The liquidation process itself remains complex, dealing with multiple claims and priorities. But the sale of those high-profile assets, from the waterfront mansion right down to the last piece of Canturi jewelry, represents the official, necessary effort to restore at least some financial stability to the lives she so thoroughly ruined.
And finally, I suppose it was inevitable that a story this compelling, this dramatic blending immense wealth, shocking betrayal, and a deeply mysterious ending, was going to be immortalized in popular culture, wasn't it?
Naturally, stories like this capture the public imagination. The entire saga was dramatized quite quickly in the Nine-network miniseries Underbelly. Vanishing Act, which aired in Australia in 2022. Actress Kate Atkinson played Melissa Caddick.
And I think when that show was shown internationally on platforms like Hulu in the U.S., it was simply called Vanishing Act, which speaks volumes, doesn't it, about the enduring public fascination with that final, terrifying uncertainty surrounding her disappearance. The performance of her life was so perfect that people still struggle to believe the final act wasn't also some kind of performance.
The illusion she created was just so meticulously well-maintained for so long that the basic facts of her death, the foot, the DNA, the modeling, still seem to struggle to completely overcome the more sensational narrative of her escape or survival.
So if we try to synthesize everything we've covered in this deep dive, perhaps the most crucial realization is just the sheer, consistent audacity required to run a life based so entirely on manufactured reality. From forging a university degree right at the start, all the way up to forging official ComSec statements for years, and even, it seems, fabricating claims of spousal abuse when cornered. Deception was clearly her primary tool, her default mode.
It really highlights the devastating power of, well, credentialism and the perception of success, doesn't it? She clearly understood that if she looked wealthy enough, lived in the right suburb, drove the right cars, and spoke with the right jargon of financial expertise, even if it was all based on fraudulent qualifications and stolen money, people, even sophisticated people, even family, would simply hand over their life savings, their retirement funds, often without demanding rigorous verification.
We know the monumental fraud, the $30 million scheme, and the eventual legal declaration of her death following the discovery of that foot. But the how and the specific circumstances of her end, they remain legally, critically elusive. Still problematical, as the coroner said.
And this enduring lack of resolution surrounding her death, it forces us, I think, to confront a fundamental vulnerability we all share, just how much we rely on trust, sometimes misplaced trust, when dealing with people who are experts at blurring the line between a carefully curated image and the verifiable, objective truth. It really makes you realize that professional trust, especially in finance, should always, always be earned through verifiable data, through regulated structures, not just through personal proximity or the flashiness of someone's lifestyle.
So perhaps we can offer you this final provocative thought for deeper reflection. When you're dealing with massive financial decisions, or even just assessing someone's claims in any field, how much due diligence do you really apply to the person standing in front of you versus just the institution they claim to represent or the image they project? What are the key lessons here for all of us about independently verifying professional credentials, commanding absolute transparency, and maybe just questioning lifestyles or promises that seem just a little bit too perfect, too good to be true? The story of Melissa Caddick is ultimately the ultimate tragic reminder that sometimes the greatest investment risk isn't in the market. It's in trusting the facade. Think about that as you go about verifying the sources and claims in your own life.